I just wanted to frame this and then get into some Q&A with Mayor Benjamin. As many of you folks know, I co-authored a book with Jeremy Nowak about 18 months or so ago called The New Localism. Jeremy had founded the Reinvestment Fund in Philadelphia, visited with Mayor Benjamin in South Carolina, ran the William Penn Foundation for a while, and we made the case that problem solving in the 21st century is bottom-up and multi-sector and interdisciplinary, quite different than it was in the 20th century. It was more top-down, really driven by federal specialized agencies. And in this new localism world, mayors play a particular role because of both their hard power, what they run in cities, but also the soft power that they have to convene leaders from the private, civic, university, labor, environmental sectors, community sectors, and beyond. And Mayor Benjamin is one of the most respected mayors in this country, just stepped down from leading the U.S. Conference of Mayors for a year. We have visited many times in Columbia and elsewhere around the country, so you're in for a real treat here today. And I thought we would just start by Mayor Benjamin just talking about his city. And when he decided to run for mayor, he was a three-term mayor. The last race was really hard, right? I think you were the only one who filed. And some of his priorities and proudest accomplishments, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Oh, thank you, Bruce, and thank you all for being here today. You're missing out because Mayor Whaley is not here. Some of you had the opportunity to see her on TV a lot lately. Obviously, the tragic mass shooting, the Dayton experience. I think a few weeks before that, they had a tornado, and maybe a few weeks before that, they had a mass Ku Klux Klan rally. Nana's been everywhere, and she is an amazing leader, and we have good things to look forward to. And in just over a year and a half, she'll take over as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, so you'll see a lot of Nan Whaley. So look forward to that. I don't like when Bruce Katz pumps you up because people really start to expect something from you. I always tell people, I think of the first time I spoke, like many of you may be serious public speakers or may be like me, you don't like doing too much of it. And I think of the first time I spoke at my home church, the St. John Baptist Church in Columbia. When I was done, a little guy came up to me. He said, "Now grow up, I'm gonna give you some money." I said, "Well, thank you, son, but why?" He said, "Because my daddy said you're one of the poorest speakers we ever had," right? So I get up to speak would actually have something worth saying. I love my city of Columbia, South Carolina. Born and raised in Queens, New York. My family migrated from the south to the north like so many African-American families did in the last part of the 20th century. My brother and I were raised and then went south to college. I became a Gamecock at the University of South Carolina at age 17, and with the exception of a few years in Raleigh, Columbia has been my home. That's where I met my beautiful wife, and we've been blessed with two incredible daughters. And it has been really my true access point to the American dream. Columbia, South Carolina is the state capital. It's still the largest city in South Carolina. Charleston is on my tail hard, and we'll determine who's the winner at the next census, and we'll see how that goes. The first planned capital city in the South. It's a unique place. The University of South Carolina is a Carnegie One research university, at least two historically black colleges, universities, Allen and Benedict College, where I serve as a trustee, Columbia College, and a strong technical college infrastructure. We also serve as home to Fort Jackson, the Army's largest training base in the world. We train half of the men for the Army, and 65% of all the women for the Army train in our city. An incredible ecosystem with state government there as well, where each of these institutions contribute billions of dollars in annual economic impact into our community. But it also presents us with a major challenge that 79.5% of our real estate is now in the tax rolls in our city. So you think about those of us who rely on ad valorem taxes to help finance your city, finance those little things you need: police protection, fire, solid waste, the things that make a city a city. So I had an opportunity to run for mayor, and I've been mayor now for 9.5 years. And my focus has really been on trying to make sure that all those wonderful component parts are working well, but also working to build a strong private sector base that allows us to really participate in the American dream. We benefited because of our DNA, that when America boomed, we didn't boom, and when it busted, we didn't bust. but it was important to me to try and build a good, strong private sector base. And that really started, that's basic math. Prior to being mayor, I served as public finance counsel for the city. I was a bond lawyer outside, and it was my job to read those boring things like consolidated annual financial reports and understand exactly how the city is financed and who pays for what, and trying to make sure that we could stimulate those economic areas that allowed us to grow, and not just to grow, but grow in a way that allowed us to become the city that we wanted to be. Our vision, and our reporters at home laugh at me, our vision is to build the most talented, educated, and entrepreneurial city in America. That's our vision. And they asked me the question, and of course they kind of mock me as I give the answer, but it's been the same answer for 10 years, ever since I campaigned for mayor. And we've been working aggressively to build those component parts, making sure we build a city that reeks of inclusion, that invests in economic opportunities, and making sure that this idea of building the American dream and all of us participating in meaningful ways has to be real. And we have to leverage our role as policymakers to do that. Our challenge when I became mayor, we had a fantastic mayor and good leadership beforehand, but we never really paid attention to the nuts and bolts, the finances of the city. We had 2 years in which we couldn't close the books in our city. So it was clear to me that we had to exercise the fiscal accountability that gave us the moral authority to actually act and do things in our city. We finished 7 of the last 9 years with a budget surplus. We've never raised taxes. We've actually reduced our tax mills by 12 mills. We've invested, I got a tax fan up there. We've invested actually a 70% increase in our investment in our police department. We've overlaid that with a significant system of transparency and accountability that it helps build the bonds of trust between public guardians and the people that they police and keep safe every single day. We've gotten upgrades from Standard & Poor's and Moody's 3 times 1 very recently. We've invested heavily in infrastructure. The defining characteristic of a developed nation is infrastructure. We have all across this city an infrastructure, all across this country, an infrastructure challenge that most Americans are not dialed into right now. Depending on who you talk to, a $2 trillion to $4 trillion deficit. We've invested about $750 million in infrastructure and water and sewer and now stormwater infrastructure, looking at the challenges of climate change. And many of you know in 2015, we had a devastating flood, lost 19 precious lives, and billions of dollars of damage all across our state, and allowed us to then decide to make a good, strong, positive investment in green infrastructure that we're already seeing the benefits of, a $100 million effort that we passed unanimously through our city council to get things done. We decided that we'll use our vantage point in South Carolina. Many of you know South Carolina has a big reputation for being a real blue state. We're not. For being a progressive city that still has a real preponderance of Republicans. We don't register by party in South Carolina, but we have about 40% Republican population in our city. But we're still a blue island in a red state with other islands throughout the state as well. We'll use our vantage point as a thoughtful city, a thinking city in the New South to try and push policy ideas that really push the envelope and force people to rethink not just our city or our state, but also cities all across the South. We've done that, and I'd be happy to talk about some of those and everything from climate and sustainability, environmental protection, to a new way to look at the Second Amendment and guns. We've passed about 6 laws in the last year and a half. Became the first city in the country to ban bump stocks after the Las Vegas massacre. And we continue to push out more laws that push America to look at the challenge of gun violence in a way that Congress refuses to do so, and recognize, and just as Bruce said, that while Congress may choose to not act, or the White House in this respect, and state governments seem to mimic that behavior, that on the local level you'll find Democratic mayors, Republican mayors, independent mayors, male, female, gay, straight, of every religious background you can imagine, focus on just getting the job done. And you'll find that American cities in particular, the metropolitan areas that we serve at the center of, are really driving policy making and driving the American economy in ways that you would never imagine 85.5% of the people live now in cities and metro economies, but almost 90% of the jobs, or 92% of America's GDP, created in cities and metro economies that start with healthy, vibrant cores surrounded by good neighborhoods, and then you have, in my city, you can be in a rural area hunting for boar or fishing for bass, whatever it is that floats your boat in a very short drive. But it starts with healthy cities, and you'll be amazed at the types of bipartisanship and the idea sharing that goes on every single day all across the country. And Bruce and Jeremy have served at the center of that for the last several years. And it's been exciting to see things happen on the local level in spite of the challenges we might see in Washington and other places.
So when you were head of the U.S. conference, we're at an Ideas We Should Steal festival. So you probably visited more places around the United States absent presidential candidates, though frankly they spend all their time in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina. But so as you moved around the country, what either impressed you to take home to Columbia? Because you've got some big transformative projects underway, the Bull Street redevelopment, your library, significant. And what kind of dynamics did you see out there that was most striking? When I've been through the country the past 5 years, what has really been most striking to me is that how many places haven't recovered from the Great Recession. Vacancy rates, if Nan was here, vacancy rates in Dayton are higher today than they were in 2008. So what have you taken? You've been around more than just about anyone around this country in the last 2 years.
Yeah, first of all, it's amazing seeing the innovation that's happening out there, and that innovation is not always in terms of broadband and innovation the ways in which we think it. Although the world is changing very rapidly, and that's something that every conversation that we have with mayors and local leaders, every thoughtful conversation includes the fact that the recession is long over, but the world is still changing rapidly. We are, in Columbia, we have residents and citizens from every one of the 194 sovereign nations of the world. We practice different religions, speak so many different languages. South Carolina enjoys more European foreign direct investment per capita than any state in the country. So we are interconnected and interdependent with the rest of the world in ways that people might not normally think. And we're not the only community like that. Every city has some unique opportunity to connect themselves with either a product or a company or really investing in entrepreneurial activity. And what I see as I get out across the country with my colleagues is I really see a sense of urgency in trying to find that thing or those things that might spur their economy forward, and not only thinking about the world in which we live in right now, but also how we're preparing for this world of the future, how automation and AI and advanced machine learning and the future of work is fundamentally changing the landscape within which we operate. 1962, 63, Eastman Kodak, a name that means something to many of you and nothing to some of you, enjoyed about 75,000 employees. At the same revenue scale in 2013, Facebook had about 6,500 employees. The way the world in which the world is changing, and how, in fact, we continue to not use just the old economic development tools that we use to try and elevate people into the middle class is a major changing, particularly as we see some very consistent and persistent data trends that show the inability for each of us to do as well as our parents did, going down pretty steeply since 1940. So I find mayors who have a sense of urgency, who are very creative about new ways to tackle old problems, who recognize their proximity to the challenge. The good thing about being a congressman or congresswoman is that you don't have to be home. You can be in DC, in distant. When a constituent has an issue with me, I hear about it at the grocery store. I hear about it at church on every Sunday as I'm trying to escape out the back. I hear it at a traffic light. Someone stops you and they want to roll down the window and they want to tell you exactly what they think about something. So the proximity to your constituents is something that forces mayors to keep it real. And you have to put real solutions up to the challenge. And we got some innovators all across the country, from Louisville, Kentucky, to Atlanta, the places you might not think of, like West Sacramento, Mesa, Arizona. Some of the big cities are finding really ways to use good data to try and solve problems, to try and become smarter cities, to become more efficient and more effective, to try and really improve not just the customer experience, but the citizen experience. It's our job not to service customers. You want to make sure you model good customer service practices, but it's our job to build citizens, and find ways to create that platform for human potential. I mean, I love this country. I worry about the future of our country, as a common theme you've heard through so many speakers right now. I've spent time not just in the country, but also going around the world, and people aren't talking about the dream of X country. That people still talk about the American dream. And if I work hard, if I get a good education, I treat people with dignity and respect, I invest and take risks, I ought to have a chance to build a life here in this country, and we still believe it's real. But I spent some time with a constitutional scholar, a good friend, January of 2017, with a group of students that I teach periodically at the university, and I asked them, is the republic fragile or resilient? And his answer was 2 words. It was, we'll see. And we're in a period right now where we're seeing whether or not we are one or the other. And I'm just hoping and praying that we get everyone out involved in this process, understanding the gravity of the challenges we're facing right now, understanding that on the local level we do have men and women working very hard to try and solve these problems. And these problems are challenging, as growing food deserts. The challenges of again, failing infrastructure in cities, even cities as large as Philadelphia and New York. We have terracotta pipes and wooden pipes still in the ground, failing infrastructure. And it's happening all across rural America. The digital divide growing. Economic insecurity is real. Watching families that once were able to rely on pensions or some availability of accessible and affordable health care just not have it. And trying to find new ways to try good ideas. We do go around the country stealing the very best ideas from one another. I mean, it's the best thing about the organizations like the U.S. Conference of Mayors that I participate in. I spend time with my colleagues, and after they share a really cool project that worked, or an event or a policy that worked, I ask them to send it to me, but I ask them, don't send it to me in a PDF format. I want it in Microsoft Word. Send it in a way in which I can just do some striking and inserting, and immediately put it to work in our city.
So I've got one more question before I get to the election, because he is co-chair of Mayor Bloomberg's presidential campaign. So we have to talk about this. But I want to talk about something that we have talked about before as we've gone around the country and particularly looked at the promise and peril of opportunity zones. So as you look at the communities that were selected, 8,762 opportunity zones that have one common characteristic, which is high poverty, more than 20%. What I have seen is the persistence of structural racism in terms of lending. There literally is a color line that runs through many cities, not just the South, but all over the country. On one side of the color line, it's a hell of a lot easier to get loans than on the other side of the color line. And second, what I've seen is this tsunami of parasitic capital. Dollar General, dollar stores, payday lenders, check cashers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's almost like it just stamps out city after city after city. So even though opportunity zones was enacted on the premise that we had incredible disinvestment in our cities, which we do, there's an enormous amount of capital. It's just the wrong kind of capital for the wrong kind of things. I want you to bring that back to Columbia, South Carolina. Is this a central issue as you've tried to grow businesses owned by people of color, as you've tried to grow home ownership within communities? How do we begin to really crack at these structural capital issues that persist and replicate themselves across the country?
Sure. Well, it takes an intentional focus on inclusion. I mean, a really intentional focus, recognizing that those challenges are very real in cities, and just the data, and I think data I actually got from Bruce years ago about the vibrance of the economy and how metro economies are driving the entire American experiment right now. But those same challenges exist in rural areas, and then it exists in rural areas in which there are no black people as well, or any people of color. The challenge of poverty is real everywhere. I was an early advocate of the Investing in Opportunity Act before before it became opportunity zones enacted in the Tax Cut and Jobs Bill. First of all, I was very attracted to the idea of having these deferred capital gains liabilities invested in these challenge census tracts. I was also attracted by the idea that that Tim Scott and Cory Booker in the Senate and Ron Kind and Pat Tiberi in the House were the four primary supporters. It was so odd even today to have bipartisan, bicameral support of an idea that sought to invest this type of capital, and we heard different numbers of hundreds of billions to potentially, a trillion into communities all across the country. The challenge about being intentional in your inclusive economic development strategy is that it really does take intentionality. It takes time. It takes good data. It takes the opportunity to articulate the regulations and policy that help you direct that capital in ways in which it can actually work towards the goals which you want to achieve. The zones were passed in December. They had to be designated by the governors by March. We were behind the 8 ball in getting the first tranche of policies and regulations out of Treasury, which first came in June, maybe June, September, August, and we're still playing catch up. So it's allowed or required mayors and others like me who are trying to drive this capital in ways in which it actually does have the desired impact in these census tracts to incentivize and encourage the types of investments that we want to see in the places in which you want to see. And I think the jury's still out. I remain concerned, and we articulated, we may have done it in this very room. I think we were here several months ago with the Accelerator for America project that Bruce and I are both involved in. That if in fact the private sector, if we were not good stewards of this new tool, that we would see some significant opposition to it and potentially some significant reform that would be in no one's best interest. And I think we're at that point right now. If things don't change rather quickly, we're starting to see the types of investments that we need to see that help increase housing affordability and accessibility, new product that help create jobs for folks. We've decided that at our city that inclusive economic development is central to who we are, and that if in fact we want our partners to make those investments, then we have to require them to live within the values of our city. So we articulate it in policy. We articulate it in our contracts. We articulate it in those we do business with. I mentioned we spent $750 million in water and sewer and stormwater capital over the last several years to address some significant challenges that we're facing with sanitary sewer overflows and just crumbling infrastructure. Every single deal we've done, not almost every deal, every single deal we've done, we've had minority and women-owned bond counsel on each deal, as underwriters counsel, or co-underwriters counsel on each deal, either running the books, minority or women-owned firms actually running the books, the financing, also serving as co-financing on the deal. We've aggressively increased the number of our minority contractors. If there are places in which there are deficits, we've developed a strong subcontractor outreach program to pull firms in, and also a mentor protege program to include folks. We've awarded some contracts that we were required to withdraw because people were not meeting their goals on inclusion. We decided that if we're going to grow, we're all going to grow together. We passed a sweeping ban the box ordinance. We began, as a matter of policy at our city, making sure that people who have been cut, many of whom have been cut out of the American economic mainstream, before they finished puberty for bad decisions that they made, that they had to get an opportunity to come back into that mainstream. So as a matter of policy, we determined that we would ban the box at the city, and we've done it for 4 years, had no challenges. So now we passed it as a matter of ordinance, and those who do business with the city are now also required to pay attention to the importance of inclusion. Again, making sure that we all have a seat at the table, because the challenges are real and they are persistent. Just as I mentioned about the advent of technology and what that means, and just the structural changes we're seeing in jobs that don't have pensions or don't have health care, and the ability for some just to keep a roof over their heads, the increasing amount of housing affordability, increasing costs to housing affordability, but not seeing wages keep up as well. We've increased our minimum wage at our city as well. So, but it requires that intentional effort at inclusion if, in fact, you're going to make some things happen. We have a wonderful housing affordability program. Many cities, some of you who may be city engineers, and I mean that in the social sense, may have to deal with community development block grant dollars. A lot of cities will sometimes take CDBG funds and they'll dole them out to residents to make a house more affordable. A $100,000 house, you get a $10,000 grant. It's by definition more affordable. We decided that we would sequester those dollars for a couple of years, and that we'd work with a cartel of different banks, 6 banks usually participating. And we went to them with a proposition: we'll have some folks who will come to you, they will have repaired credit, this is an opportunity, a new home or maybe a second home. But if you loan them 80% of the loan, we'll loan the other 20%. We'll take a second position to your mortgage. It's a great mortgage for you. Your risk profile is lower. We want your very best rate. Our rate comes in a revolving loan format at 1% or 1.5%. And people are able to walk into a home with no down payment, a $100,000 home with $500 out of pocket. We've now grown that to a loan portfolio of about $130 million. But with ways to invest in families, $130 million with a default rate of less than 1%. People are buying homes and they're staying in their homes. It's a way in which you invest into folks in ways in which you have to, again, be intentional about what you do. But I hope and pray that we're able to retain opportunity zones, and we're able to reform the regulations in a way that will continue to attract capital, but allow us to really invest in people and in families.
So get some questions ready. I want to shift to the presidential race and ask this general question.
Taking questions from the audience?
Oh, yeah. I hope.
Can't even see them.
Okay. Well, but Larry can see them.
It's like on Twitter.
So here is the way to think about this. We've, since the beginning of the Republic, to become president, you basically had to be a general, a vice president, a senator, or a governor. That was the path to the White House. In this race, we've got Mayor Bloomberg, Mayor Pete, Senator Booker, former mayor of Newark, HUD Secretary Castro, former mayor of San Antonio, Bernie Sanders, former mayor of Burlington, Vermont. We all forget that about Bernie. John Hickenlooper, former governor of Colorado, was mayor of Denver. What's happening? And, if we have a mayor in the White House, and this is where you get to say something about Mike Bloomberg, what difference do you think it makes? We know mayors are more pragmatic. Just in terms of the answers you just gave, we know you understand issues with a depth and specificity and groundedness more than many of our folks at the national level or in state legislatures. But do you think it's going to have a fundamental change on policy design and policy execution? But this is different. We've crossed a Rubicon in the U.S. Running as a mayor or being a mayor now means you can serve in the highest office in the land. That is a big shift that has happened in this election for the first time.
Well, I think it means America's maturing, finally growing up. I am also the unabashed president of the Mayor's Mutual Admiration Society. Also, give me a little bit of leeway here. The great thing about being a mayor is that the mayor has to speak to the hopes and dreams of all of her citizens, all of his citizens. We don't come from gerrymandered districts that only require you to speak to a small subset of who might get you through a highly partisan primary in a district in which the outcome is already determined. We have so many few swing districts now. It gives a mayor a very special skill set. I believe that requires them to speak usually to the better angels of our nature. Being on the ground does require you to develop at least a functional understanding of not just what's happening in your city, but how state funding affects what happens in your city, how federal funding or the lack thereof happens in your city. Many of us don't know that. I spoke earlier about water sewer infrastructure and how crucial it is and how it's failing, not just in places like Flint or in small towns like Denmark and South Carolina, but only 1.5% of water sewer infrastructure funding comes from Washington, D.C. It all comes from the local level. Infrastructure funding in general, 70% of it or so, comes from state and local levels, not from the federal government. So the mayor has a different perspective, and I think it goes back, as you said at the beginning of the Republic, is that cities don't, of course you have some very planned cities, and we are that in terms of our original land survey laid out in 1786. But cities usually are born. They're not these perfectly carved boxes by cartographers that you see on the map that represent the 50 states. But there was a Native American settlement on this fertile soil that lent itself to great trade or trade routes, and cities have a bit of a DNA that mayor adopts when she becomes mayor, and her ability to speak to that allows her to be elected, and then they begin to manifest that in your behavior. I do believe that the president's primary role, in addition to all the other things the president is supposed to do, is to set the tone, set the proper tone that we treat one another by, to not only mimic to the rest of the world what American values are and what America is supposed to represent, but also teaching each of us how we should treat each other with dignity and respect. I've been around politics longer than I care to admit. I'm not a millennial. I'm what you call a perennial. I'm now 50 years old. We are the gift that keeps giving perennials, I will tell you. If taken as a country, over 50, we are more entrepreneurial than millennials. And we also represent about a $7.6 trillion market. If you look at that in terms of GDP, it'd be third only to the US and China. So I will tell you, those of you who are city builders, don't sleep on perennials. You want to attract them just like you want to attract everyone else to your city. Got an over 50 crowd here? Give it some love. But that's the president's job, to try and bring people together and to emote that every single day. I think mayors are uniquely equipped to do that, and that's why I'm thankful that we have so many mayors and former mayors running.
And Mike?
Yeah, and I'm excited about Mike Bloomberg. I will serve as co-chair of his campaign. I think the work that Mayor Bloomberg has done, he didn't get $1 million or $20 million from his dad to start his business. He got fired. He got fired from his job, started a business in 1981 and built it to a global brand employing 300,000 people. He led New York quite well post 9/11 for 12 years and helped an economy that is, I believe, second only to 7 or 8 different countries of the world. New York City GDP and GNP is larger than that of the country of Russia. At the heart of a $1.8, nearly $2 trillion market there. And even most importantly, I think looking at his charity and philanthropy, not just in the U.S., not just in terms of arts and the incredible work he's done in climate and ending gun violence, but all across the globe, empowering women in Rwanda and the DRC, fighting disease across the globe. I think it's very easy to find people who are distinguished business people, who have been great public servants, and those who have been incredible philanthropists. I think it's rare to find all three of those in one individual. And I'll be frank, I tell myself I wouldn't come up here and be partisan, but we've got to win next November. And I am committed to doing every single thing I can to not just making Mike Bloomberg the nominee, but if he's not the nominee, to supporting a Democratic nominee to defeat Donald Trump.
Questions?
Questions? Right over here. Good afternoon. I'm Yvette Nunez, VP of Civic Affairs at the Chamber of Commerce. There's a large contingency of Nunezes who have gone from Pennsylvania to Columbia, South Carolina, and I hope that they all voted for you. But in the spirit of mutual admiration, what idea would you steal from Philadelphia?
I'm trying to think of how many different things. Obviously, Mayor Kinney is doing great work. He's focusing like a laser beam. One of my last acts as president of the Conference of Mayors was to appoint him as chair of our homelessness task force. I know he's having some innovations here. My closer relations and ties were with Mayor Nutter. I work closely with Mike Nutter on a number of different things. I think most of us tend to devalue investment in the arts around the country and the ways in which the arts can bring people together, can catalyze economic investment in communities. When we were investing in our Main Street and our downtown, we've seen about $2 billion worth of investment in and around our downtown. The Bull Street project that Bruce mentioned earlier is the largest economic development project in any downtown east of the Mississippi. 181 acres, 6 blocks or so as the crow flies from City Hall. But we recognize in our central business district that our investment in our art museum and our arts infrastructure in a way that really helped attract all the other types of investment we wanted to see was game-changing. No place has done that as well as Philadelphia has. And I'd probably put Pittsburgh actually a close second. The philanthropic community there has been central to making some things happen. So that'd be one thing we did take from Philadelphia. I'd look to get some more.
Yes.
And I would say this too, just in case many people, there's some long-term historic ties between Philadelphia and South Carolina and the American South. The birth of African Methodism here, the foundation laid here by a number of Philadelphians, but particularly the Society of Friends and the Quakers, laying the foundation for when America was going through our original sin, and some would say we're still battling it as we speak. The moral authority that was laid out here in Philadelphia helped set the tone for the rest of the country, and I think in some respects it still does.
We got one up here. I got it.
Okay. My name is Richard Levinson. I wanted to ask you, every city wants a team, every city wants a sports stadium. In fact, doesn't the history show that sports stadiums are a really risky bet for most American communities?
Have you been Googling me, Mr. Levinson? We were the largest city in the country without a professional sports franchise, meaning major league and minor league in any discipline, football, baseball, soccer, basketball. And it was one of my commitments that I wanted to bring baseball back to Columbia. Baseball in the South, and particularly in South Carolina, is still huge. And it's challenging, and more kids playing soccer now than I've ever seen before. But it was something I wanted to make happen in Columbia, South Carolina, and we wound up building, actually, it's now Segra Park, 6 years or so ago, launched it at the heart of this Bull Street district. But we did it in a way that other places may not have. It required, from our vantage point, a public-private partnership that required the private sector to participate in a significant way. I've mentioned my aversion to taxes, so we were not going to raise taxes. We're going to use existing sources of revenue and investment, about a third of the stadium for the private sector, but also looking at the deferred capital costs, what it would take to maintain that stadium in pristine condition over the term of as we defeased that debt over 30 years, that we were going to bear none of that responsibility. The reality is that, operations and maintenance actually usually cost more than the capital investment to build it. So we had to build a structure that worked for the people of our city. That park is not only a sports stadium, but it also hosts about 400 different events throughout the year. It is a public park. So when the sun rises, the gates open. People can go there. They can go and have lunch. It's a third of a mile around the track there. You'll see families jogging throughout the day. It is one way to provide, and minor league baseball, of course, is different than Major League Baseball, but it's a way to provide family-friendly, affordable entertainment that eludes so many families today. You can actually take a family of 4 to a baseball game eat, enjoy some drinks. Dad or mom can have a real drink and spend less than $50 still. So it's something that was important to us. Our facility, Segra, now was named by Baseball Digest as the stadium of the decade just a month or two ago. It was the stadium of the year 2 years ago. But so I'll say this, that that people will have different ideas about whether or not this is a baseball stadium, a public park, a venue that hosts concerts, all different types of things. We had to really sell, and I had to carry it on my back. We won it by one vote on city council, just to be frank with you, one vote to get this done. But now it's regularly lauded by our citizens as one of the very best investments we've made. It's got to be an investment in the public realm, and that's one thing that we really don't spend much time talking about now. We talk about investments in technology, but we rarely talk about ways in which we build cities. 30 years from now, people won't remember what the crime rate was. They won't remember what the unemployment rate was. But the smart investments you make in the public realm, places where you can pull citizens together and have them share, again, their hopes and dreams and ideas about what the world should look like, are sound investment. But it's got to pencil. The math has got to be right, and that's something that we've made a priority in our administration.
We have time for maybe one or two more. Other questions? All the way up there. I'll be right back. We got two more. I want to be diverse
I
geographically.
encourage you all, follow me on Twitter, Steve Benjamin SC. I feel like I'm on Twitter right now. I really can't see any of you right now. What social media has given people is anonymity and reach. So if your face is there and on Twitter, I can see you. I will respond usually to what you say. If I can't see your face, then you're just a bot from somewhere else in the world, and I will ignore you.
My name's Eli Rodriguez, and earlier in your talk, you mentioned that we're at a point in time where for the first time in our history, we seem to have, like, I guess the easiest way to put this is a bunch of mayors running for president. And you seem to put that as if, like, that were a means to bring about new and large change. But what makes this difference in the demographic of the presidential candidates any different from, like, changes in previous presidencies? What makes this change in, like, the playing field of candidates different from ones past?
Well, the question was about mayors, so I answered that question. But I will say as well, I still remain convinced that the Democratic field is suffering from a bit of an embarrassment of riches right now. We have the most diverse field that we've ever had, and I mean that in terms not just of gender and race, but also in geography and political philosophy. It's a big tent, and I think that's healthy, and it's working its way eventually to a nominee that I hope will have the ability to speak to the entirety of the party. So I'm a mayor, so I'll always speak and believe that history. Senator Sanders was probably the first of the ones in the bunch to serve as a mayor all the way through. Mayor Buttigieg, who's still sitting, he also left off Wayne Messam from Miramar, who also dropped off, was another mayor in the mix for a while. But I think that the mayoral perspective, having to serve citizens hand to hand, mano a mano, on an everyday level, helps to humanize a public servant in a way that I think Washington, D.C. Does not right now. And I think that's helpful. I will say that I hope and pray that as we continue to talk about the campaign, as things go on, that we'll talk more about economic opportunity and creating real ladders for folks to begin to climb that ladder again into the middle class or upper class, recognizing the incredible challenges that we're facing in the American economy right now, which are systemic and amazingly challenging.
We got another one right here.
Hi, Mayor. My name's Denise Clay, and in addition to being a resident of the Delaware Valley, I am also a journalist, so this question is probably not going to, surprise you much. But at a time when voters, particularly younger voters, are looking at people like Michael Bloomberg and saying the last thing we need in the nation's highest office is yet another oligarch, how do you I guess, talk to people about that. And also, I mean, this is the most diverse, or at least it was the most diverse Democratic field in history until the people of color either started getting ignored or having to drop out. And yet, we're a more diverse nation, and it doesn't seem like people are getting traction in favor of people that can literally buy their way in at any time. So if you could, kind of explain to me so that I can make my readers understand why they should even consider, going to the polls when basically what we're being told by some of the actions, particularly of the billionaires in the race, that this race can be bought, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, well, first of all, yeah, sure. First of all, I would not characterize the idea that you don't want to fundraise or you don't want to ask people for their hard-earned dollars to campaign as that this race can be bought. You got to be able to compete, whether it's in raising money from bundlers or raising from small dollar donors. He's made the determination that he will spend his own money to get his message out. He didn't inherit his money. He worked and he earned his money. I believe that the larger the conversation has to be about how we recognize that the challenges of economic opportunity are much more real now than they were even a generation ago. So I'd ask people to look at the policies of Mayor Bloomberg and every other candidate in this race to see exactly how they're going to be creative and thoughtful, using data as a foundation, but your heart as your guide to make sure more people can participate in the American economy. I don't believe that I'm a good person. That was my first job. That I was a good person when I was making $40,000. I was a good person when I started making $100,000. When I made my first $1 million, that I'm not really cool anymore, or that once you exceed that at some point you become a bad person just because you created wealth. And I think we have to make sure that is not the message of the Democratic Party. If in fact we do that, then we steal the idea of the American dream from so many people. Now, should billionaires and millionaires and everyone else pay their fair share in taxes to make sure that America is what it should be? The answer is definitely yes, and Mike Bloomberg will tell you that as well. But just because someone creates wealth doesn't mean that they're out of step with America. And I think we have to be very careful as a party, or else we'll lose a significant number of the electorate, not just here on the East Coast, but on the West Coast, and also in the Midwest and the heartland of the country. So that's my answer. All right.
Do we have a little more time?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
We have a few more minutes.
That's fantastic.
Well,
I know the clock was out, so I got more of an answer for you, but
we'll keep it here
do it
for
afterwards,
one.
okay?
Hi, my name is Hannah Shimashko. I just want to ask a follow-up question. Well, sorry. I just was curious. So, I work as a contractor, so I currently do make like $15 an hour, which is minimum wage, fortunately, and it's not livable, so I live with my parents. But, so looking as I am a millennial, so looking as a millennial at that perspective, it is disheartening because when Bloomberg did enter late, it did appear that way, to me at least. So my follow-up question to you is...
What did appear to you?
It looked as though he bought his way into it, the election, even if he was giving his own money, and that's great. He also did have a lot of advantages that many other people didn't have, and it's kind of hard to neglect that.
Which advantages are those?
Well, he had a father that had a very successful business.
No, he
already.
didn't. No, his dad made $6,000 a year at his height in his career.
But that
$6,000 a year.
But you just said that he wasn't given anything.
I'm sorry?
You said that he wasn't given anything from his father's career.
No, I said his dad earned only $6,000 a year at the height of his career. And I said I have you're not a child, but I have children who also have very strong views about the candidates in the race that they support, and a number of young people. I'm surrounded by millennials in my office who have very strong views, and they're not all with me, I might add, on my choice. But I do take exception with terms like oligarchs and the idea that, again, that just because you make money, it means that you no longer have a right to run for office or to serve your people. Every bit of profit that Mike Bloomberg makes every year from Bloomberg LP goes straight to charity. Last year, close to $1 billion in helping build up communities all across the globe. I don't think that should be dismissed. But I will tell you this, that the power in the American electorate, I told a group of fifth graders yesterday that I spoke to at one of our fantastic elementary schools in our city, is that the power in the electorate still remains with the people. In our state, it will be February 29th. And in Super Tuesday states, it will be on March 3rd. And we'll have Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada by then. Every different campaign is going to have to run their own ideas around policy. Young people, millennials like you, people have to articulate a real policy to deal with student loan debt and the crippling effects of well over $1 trillion of student loan debt, and ways in which we can deal with that to make sure that our fantastically talented millennials can really begin to participate in the economy. We got to deal with ways in which we have this massive disalignment with a significant number of unfilled jobs over here, and folks who are either unemployed or underemployed over here still in this period of what we are told is record low unemployment, but not real in so many communities all across the country. So I would say judge the candidates, all the candidates, not just Mayor Bloomberg, all of them, but by their policies and their ideas. Join them if they articulate your hopes and dreams. Actually look at their records, not just their records and voting records, but their records of actually getting something done. If it's in the Senate, or if it's in the governor's mansion, or if it's in another legislative body in which they serve, or in City Hall. I think making sure you don't shut doors to any of the candidates without actually giving a real once-over, and not disqualifying people like Mike Bloomberg or any other candidate just because of their wealth or just because of where they may come from in the country.
I have a question, Bruce. It's one that I asked you last year. I want to give a shout out to the mayor for a couple times you've said you don't just reflexively raise taxes, which is something a lot of us wish we heard more often from elected leaders. Bruce, we talked about this last year. Is there a way to for cities to capitalize on revenue streams without always going with their hand out to the taxpayer?
Yeah, I think there's several moves that are exist in Northern Europe and exist in parts of Asia, where cities, with their public assets, land or buildings that they own, when they create value, they capture a portion of that value, and then they deploy it back for public benefit. So Copenhagen is the model of the world, right? They took the land they owned along their harbor after they lost their manufacturing, after the port ceased to function. They've built back the harbor. I mean, Copenhagen is the third wealthiest city in the world, and revenues from that regeneration go to support the building of a 21st century subway. Not a kroner of taxes is in that subway. It's all from value capture. So there is a model. We haven't really deployed it in the United States because public ownership is so fragmented, not just between the federal, state, county, and city, but across the Port Authority, the Airport Authority, the Stadium Authority, and my favorite, the Parking Authority. But so if we could get our act together, we could not replicate, but adapt the model that is quite common in Copenhagen, Hamburg, Stockholm, Helsinki, et cetera.
And pensions as well. I mean, so you have all across this country, you have trillions of dollars of pension dollars wanting to get into meaningful infrastructure build out, and they don't require private equity returns. You're talking about low dollar, long-term ROI, 6-7%. That still allows you to invest. And if, in fact, you capture that stream of capital and pep it with policy along the way, that includes hiring. When we built our baseball stadium, we went and trained 40 men and one woman from our homeless shelter and from our housing authority, and trained them for 4 weeks, gave them jobs. They actually hung sheetrock and laid bricks and everything else, and continue to remain employed in our economic ecosystem. But it takes, again, an intentionality that requires you to focus on making that happen. But you can grow. You can grow and create more public sector wealth by doing so.
So this is a great conversation. Let's thank Mayor Benjamin and thank Larry. Philadelphia citizen, great job for this.